Hi, my name is Peter Moe, and I'm from Tourism Ireland's Nordic office in Copenhagen. Today we will be talking about Ireland's hidden heritage, the stories and myths of the landscape, and how they connect with the archaeological sites and the habitats that have survived into the 21st century. We have the perfect person with us here today to enlighten us on this. Martin Bradley, who guides ritual landscape tours that range from Derry Londonderry. Now, Martin, you're very welcome to our show here today. Would you mind telling our listeners what made you start these tours?
Hello, Peter. Good to speak to you. Right, I've always been interested in past environments, and I trained in environmental science, and I then studied paleoecology, which is really past habitats. It's like almost like I describe it as something like plant archaeology. So I've always been interested in the past, but it's also the past where it ties in with the landscape. So my inspiration for really what I developed then on the ritual landscape tours came from Derry Londonderry. We hold the biggest Halloween festival, I would say, probably in the world. And then I realized that nobody really talked about the history of Halloween and where it came from and where it evolved from. It actually is something that really comes from our Celtic and even Bronze Age past, and that's right across Europe. But what's happened is that the whole Halloween thing has been preserved on the Celtic fringe. That's us folks in Ireland, particularly on the west coast of Ireland, and maybe up onto Scotland as well, the west coast of Scotland. And we preserved what happened through the different reformations and different changes in religion and whatever else. So we really preserved that for various reasons. And that's the festival then that now is developed through the council in Derry Londonderry, and it's turned out to be a very, very big event. So I'm with a kind of academic background.
I know.
Yeah, it's actually getting out onto the site and then describing the sites and describing the links with the past. So that's where it all comes from.
That sounds really interesting. No, but that's really good. That's really interesting. I mean, there's bound to be loads of sites around when you have this strong connection then. So what do you then do on your tours? Do you just hike, or what places do you visit?
We can hike, but largely what I do, because it's I find when people arrive, they don't know what to expect, and they arrive then. Some people might even arrive in trainers, but in Ireland it's wet a lot of the time, and they're going to cross wet grass, but particularly things like bog habitats. But even to get to some of the ritual sites, things like holy ground or standing stones or stone circles, they're going through wet grass. So at the very least, they need Wellington boots. That's rubber boots, we call them in Europe. Just so that, and people are. So what I've done is actually stock up on a range of sizes of Wellington boots, male and female sizes, for the people that then turn up without the proper footwear on them. You Scandinavians are good.
That's really good service. Yeah. Well, I use a size 49 European, so do you have that in stock?
Big feet. It's
really big feet,
it's to get people out there, appreciate the sites and see them. Like, we even have things, like, it's not even the archaeology, where we have trees, like rag trees, cure trees, fairy trees. There's a multitude of different types of trees, and it's particular species of trees as well. So that's something that really comes through from my background in paleoecology, because a lot of what we find in the bogs and in the soil are remnants of trees, bits of wood, and some of the seeds, and even the pollen then in the bogs from trees.
Of course.
And we can make those links with the species that we had, that are native species to Ireland. Now, Ireland, even botanically, is quite restricted compared to Europe. We've only got maybe about 1,000 species of plants that are true to Irish, because we're on the western fringe. So it's a lot of those plants that's a lot of those plants then that became sacred plants and ritual plants, particularly the trees and shrubs. So I would describe that kind of thing to people as well as we go through. So it's almost like a gardening, but it's like an ancient Irish gardening trip as I talk my way through it.
That actually sounds lovely.
Yeah.
That sounds really lovely. So you mentioned that there was only about 1,000
species. Yeah, roughly.
You mentioned there was only about 1,000 species. Yeah. So what do you do to preserve those roughly 1,000 species that you have in Ireland that are native?
That's where
I know that you like sustainable tourism.
yeah. It's that type of thing. It's really it's what I can do. I'm only a small part of it. The government would know that they've got habitats that they should be protecting, and they've been developing that things in Northern Ireland where I come from, but also then in the Republic of Ireland. So special habitats like some of the bogs that are very rare now right across Europe. So those are now preserved habitats. But also what I do, I see my part in the whole sustainable tourism side of things. Sustainable tourism to me isn't just about someone putting a solar panel on the roof and then saying, look, I'm green. Sustainable tourism is about awareness and education about the habitats and even the archaeology and why we should conserve them and appreciate them. That's sustainable. That's real sustainability, because then people can realize why we should be protecting them. If you get my
Yeah, they'll appreciate it more.
yeah,
They'll appreciate it and want to protect it
and
themselves.
the fact is then when
Exactly.
the local people then see that you're people coming from maybe Denmark or North America or whatever, and they're interested in these things, they themselves then start to appreciate them even more as well, because they say, hey, there must be something in this, there must be something interesting here. So I find that happening as well.
So there's a whole knock-on effect.
Yeah, because I find people curious and actually stopping with me when I'm out with groups, and I go to places tourists never get to, and they kind of look at you and say, "What are you doing?" And then that's the tourists don't really enjoy that, because then they get interacting with the local that say, "Well, I never thought that was from people here."
I can imagine you wouldn't meet many tourists walking around the bog. To be honest, that would be.
Well, the bogs are really don't know the whole kind of speciality, but it's even going into some of the forests. So what I try and do, even when we're in forests, a lot of them are now mixed forests, where there's other European species that have been brought over this last 500, 600 years. So I then identify the native Irish species, and then to say that's an English species, that's a Spanish species, and that type of thing. So it's also what I call biogeography. So then again, get an idea of where the different plants come. But it's plants that are suited to our type of climate and our soils also, and they flourish. Trouble is sometimes they flourish too much and push out the native plants, shade them out, and do things like that.
Yeah.
Well, even that, and that's about sustainability as well, because what we're doing in that case is actually sustaining native plant genetics, rather than letting maybe foreign species come in and just dominate the area. So there's that type of thing comes into it as well, and that's sustainability. Sustainability is really about conservation. It's not just that handed little title of sustainability. I'm driving an electric car. I'm putting up a wind turbine. It's really about kind of conservation of everything that's in the environment. That's a wide-ranging subject.
Yeah.
That's why I take people out all day.
But it's good to know that people can come and talk to you all day about this. I imagine many people will want to do that, actually. It's a quite interesting subject in itself, the whole subject about biodiversity and invasive species. But I think going back to the ritual landscapes and mythical landscapes, I think it'd be interesting to know, Martin, what is your favorite Irish myth or folklore story?
Yeah, well, you would have that myths and folklore, but that's part of the element as well, is that things like fairy trees, where you have a fairy tree, it's a particular species, the hawthorn, we call them whitethorn, but where those are then seen as ritual trees or sacred trees, that tree is conserved, because nobody locally is going to damage that tree, because then there's a curse comes with it, maybe even death if you damage the tree. And that's a whole continuation of stories on that ritual landscape thing. So that's the other inspiration that comes into it, because so that's conservation because of mythology and the respect for the past. Now, that kind of thing, maybe even with us, is starting to age out with the younger people that are messing about with their iPlayers and different things. But it's even instilling that into them would be something, because that then conserves those trees way into the future as well. So,
tell me then, what happens though if you destroy a white hawthorn then?
If you destroy the white hawthorn, there's stories of people the myths and the legends are that maybe their cattle die the next day, or the farmer himself that cut down the tree he maybe has a stroke or a heart attack. And no, there even is stories where we have fairy trees where they're building new roads and they put a bend on the road around the tree. Do you get that in Europe? It's not that often that we do it, but they definitely do it. So it's that, because especially then, say the contractor or whoever's working on the road is local and they have a local knowledge, or someone tells them. It's a different matter if maybe like an English company arrive over, because they wouldn't have that mythology and they wouldn't have that superstition built into them.
No, of course.
Yeah, so then
that's really good. So you mentioned fairy trees. What are fairy trees?
fairy trees are usually a tree that grows in isolation on its own, maybe in the middle of a field, but it's also then associated with other features. I know a great example in an area called the Sperrins, which is maybe about 20 miles from Derry, and we actually have a Bronze Age stone alignment. And at the end of the alignment, there's a fairy tree, and this is a really old species of Sorbus mountain ash. It's an ancient tree. I just know from the look of it that it's a really old tree, but that's a fairy tree. But it's also a fairy tree because it's associated with the Bronze Age alignment, which itself has an interesting archaeological and astronomical history. Just to add things to the plot.
So Bronze Age alignment is a circle of stones or something
no,
that's
the Bronze
used
Age
to
alignment is a
tell.
straight line of stones that lined up with something in the distance. And it's to do with the
Right.
worship of the moon in Bronze Age times. But then the fairy tree,
Fair enough.
because the tree then grew up in association and lined up with the tree, or lined up with the alignment at the other end of the alignment, that tree then became regarded as a fairy tree because of its alignment
part of the alignment
with the Bronze Age alignment. Yeah. So that tree will never be touched.
Oh,
I know
okay.
the farmer that owns the land that the tree's on. I say, well, do you even gather the wood and burn the wood? He says, not a chance. It's just if the branches fall off it, they're left to rot because of the curse.
I mean, that's very good for the local insect life, I guess.
Yeah.
That sounds really magical, though. That well, it's always really magical when stuff like that happens. That it's lining up with the stone rows.
But it's how each then. It's what's also interesting. It's where then a past. So where it's a Bronze Age site that was created because of the moon and alignment with the moon at a certain time of the year. But then in Celtic times, then it then became respected. The tree then became respected because it actually lined up with the alignment. So it's how one archaeological era and the people from those eras pass things on to the next generation or the next era. And now I'm talking about it in the 21st century.
And what about then? What are the other archaeological features then that you can find? So we have fairy trees, but what else?
Well, fairy trees wouldn't be regarded as archaeological, but that's pure. That's the academic side of me coming out paying no attention to that. You have stone circles, standing stones, which are fascinating because I know another one that's about 95% pure quartz, and it's maybe sits about 2 meters above the ground, probably in weight's about 5 ton, and it's pure quartz. Now that one has to have some kind of ritual significance because the whole thing now with crystals and whatever, quartz crystals, different types of crystals. But this is like a super duper crystal. And someone in the Bronze Age said, "Hey, that's an interesting looking rock." Up it went, and it was a standing stone. And then it's you never know what the rituals were.
And the standing stone is just a single stone standing somewhere,
standing on its own,
it's been raised.
Yeah, standing stone rather than a stone row or a stone circle. We also then have stone circles. As I mentioned, I know a site now, it's maybe about 20 miles, 22 miles from Derry, and it's actually the biggest stone circle in the northern half of Ireland. So that's an interesting site. But again, that site's Bronze Age, but it's built on a site. In the center of that site, there's a Neolithic tomb, or the remnants of a Neolithic tomb, which is going even further back in time. So the people in the Bronze Age realized there was something ritual in this site. They built their stone circle around the tomb. And then the Celts came along and they started burying things like stone heads, carved stone heads and that type of thing on the site because archaeologists then have dug them up. So that's 3 archaeological eras on one site.
Yeah, continuation. Continuation of the legends.
Or rituals on that site because of the significance of it.
Yeah.
So it's how one generation and why the people respect what happened in the past, and then that again comes for me the whole sustainability. It's respect for the past and respect for the landscape. For me, yeah,
that's perfect. So, in the mythical landscape, you have the fairy trees, the tombs, the rows of stones or standing stones as well. Anything else to watch out for?
Stone-wise, what do you got? Then you have there are also things like, before we even get into the bog bodies, which are the big one, things like the ritual wells. I've clocked up about 12, 10 or 12 ritual wells, sacred wells, holy wells, pagan wells, again, in the
Yeah.
vicinity of Derry Londonderry. So each of these then have a legend with them or an association. A lot of them then would be called cure wells, like cures for warts. That's the one I was at yesterday. I was at
So if you're sick in some way,
yeah,
you can go there
for a
and
cure. Yeah, long before
drink the water, or
long before we
but do you
had
actually drink the water, or you?
yeah, you can drink the water. Usually what I do to people is never drink the water in the summertime, but can drink some of the water in the wintertime because the bugs or whatever then are knocked back by the colder temperatures.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably safer that way. But usually it's a case of rubbing on like the eye well. I came across now this. I'm still learning. I'm still finding sites. Just about 2 weeks ago, I came across an eye well. That's only about 5 miles again from Derry, Londonderry.
And what is an eye well?
An eye well, so it's a cure for all sorts of eye ailments. And it's no, I got photographs of it, but it's a fascinating sight because someone then has tied some wire from one tree to another, and dangling on the wire there's old pairs of glasses and bits of rags, maybe where someone dipped the rag in the well and then rubbed their eye if they've got an eye ailment. But the glasses are fascinating, and they've been there for years because they're dirty and covered in algae and that type of thing. So it's not that somebody's just gone out and planted them to try and attract a few Scandinavian tourists.
But it's really interesting. I mean, imagine, well, that you're still finding these places. I mean, as you are still finding these places. Where do you go to find out about these new wells? Is it just hearsay, or is it?
A lot of there's quite a few are marked on the map, so it just says like on the map holy well. It doesn't differentiate and tell you what the cure is for them. But even trying to
Oh,
find
right.
them, because a lot of them are kind of overgrown, and because maybe people are falling. Well, what are they falling away in pagan religion as opposed to any religion? But they're now getting overgrown, some of the sites. So I make a point then of bringing maybe secateurs with me and cut my way through with secateurs to get to some of the sites as well. So it's actually just being determined to.
Oh.
I'm like, it's paleoecology, it's plant archaeology, and that's largely what I'm doing to find these wells as well, based on maps and just walking and checking out the sites. Like I mentioned, near the eye well, there's allegedly a head well, and that's got all kinds of connotations. So if you've got head ailments, and what kind of head ailments it cures. So when I find that one, if it still exists, that would be one worth getting a few photographs of.
And make sure to go there if you have a headache, because that's probably the easiest one to cure.
Yeah, could be. But even at that, you see, you could still be tied in with some of the plants like meadowsweet and other plants, even some of the tree species. If you have a headache, if you chew the leaves on them, you can be able to cure some with natural natural aspirins or in some of the tree leaves, like in some of the salix trees, I think, in the bark
I
as
can
well.
imagine even just walking to the. I can imagine even just walking to some of these might be the cure itself.
It's good for you.
Fresh
Yeah.
air and
Get a
yeah,
bit of exercise. Yeah, but that's the key.
exactly.
It's really just finding these things and being interested in them. But what really got me into it then was that I knew the species when I was looking at them, and then I could then look up the species. So if you look up the species then in English or in Latin or whatever, you can then link into some of these stories that tie into them as well, and the legends with the tree species. So a lot of the holy wells that I mentioned actually have trees associated with them, particularly trees like hawthorn and ash. So there are trees that are associated with the holy wells as well. And then they would be regarded as not fairy trees, but sacred trees because they've grown on the sites and been left alone. They also then become the place to tie a rag to, and then known as rag trees, where you maybe have, if you've got a sore elbow, dip your damp rag or
Yeah, of
dip your
course.
rag in the water, rub your sore elbow, and then tie the rag to the tree
Oh,
on
I
site.
mean, obviously. So that's one example of some rituals that have survived. Are there any other rituals that have survived to this day, or
The biggest one's Halloween for us. Although now it's become
biggest one? Obviously, Halloween.
Halloween, but it also has become because of Halloween with the say the West Coast Scots and the Irish and going to North America. It then became adopted in North America, and then Hollywood got its hands on it. And then Hollywood, but the thing is, then when Hollywood got its hand on it and started making movies like Halloween and something like that, that then bounced back to Europe. And there's now parts of Europe that would never have paid any attention to Halloween that now do because of Hollywood. And a lot of people mightn't even realize that they're Celtic, so they're really Irish and Scottish traditions. And again, they were all over Europe at one time, probably in Northern Europe at one time. But we're the remnants of the Celts, so we preserve these traditions. Whereas maybe in Europe you have the different ethnic groups or whatever. Even in Europe, that was pushed out and forgotten about, but we preserved them to hand them to Hollywood, aren't we? Doesn't the world owe us a lot?
Well, I think it definitely does. It's a good tradition. It's a fun one. I particularly like carving the turnips, not the pumpkins, the turnips, because they make way scarier lanterns.
Yeah.
Especially just when they've been a couple of days old, they shrivel in and.
Yeah.
Well, let's say a pumpkin is rather inviting. The turnip, it looks evil.
I've done it when I was young. I haven't done it recently, and you can't actually get big turnips these days. But when I was younger, we used to be to get big turnips, and you sit and carve at it for a couple of days with a pen knife. But you really need to gouge. It's like a bit of woodworking trying to carve a turnip because
you really do. You really do.
So you need a vice and a mallet and a woodworking gouge and chip them out. That exactly again is where you have the pumpkins. The pumpkins are a tradition then because pumpkins grew probably they're a Central American plant, just off the top of my head, I think, or maybe even the southern states of America. But pumpkins are much easier carved, so
they're also hollow, so that helps a bit.
Hollow, yeah, but much easier carved. So they're the lazy person's turnip. But that was again the Irish and the Scots going to North America, and then they realized, hey, there's an easier way to do this. Jack-o'-lanterns, they call them.
Yeah, exactly. But I would still recommend anyone try the turnip instead, because it is quite fun. It'll definitely stand out in your street if you have a turnip.
Yeah.
Although they might not be as big as the pumpkins, obviously.
It's not going to be as big, but it'll be authentic. Put a candle in the middle of it, then, and you're all set. But it's that, and don't use a knife that's too sharp. Might slip.
Yeah, no, definitely.
You cut your finger, they'll be coming to me looking for a cure well for a bad cut.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you cut your finger, you're going to have to go to yourself and find a hand well or a finger well. Body?
Yeah. No. A cut well, a wound well. Now, interesting, there are some species.
Cut well, okay.
There are some species of mushroom that were actually used as band-aids in the Bronze Age. So I could take them to, I know one or two species of fungus that's the same species. And if you cut them back, you can actually see how they would work as a band-aid. Who needs to go to
okay. I'm guessing that would be quite specific to a time of year, actually. But when would you recommend to come and visit? I mean, obviously, then there is summer is always what everyone says, but how about what can you experience in winter?
Any time of the year, because we'd have the sites that are actually tied in with particular seasons, like the spring festivals are tied in with the stone circle that I mentioned. So it's the Bethlehem Festival. So that's spring festival in early May. So it ties in the whole thing where May Day came from as well, coming through in history right across Europe, not just with us. When you have Midsummer Festival, St. John, and some of the plants that are tied in with St. John Festival. And particularly then we have Dancing at Lagusna, which was a play that was written by a local playwright about this kind of culture. I have to read the play. I've seen the movie, but I've never read the play yet. But that's all to do with the Midsummer Festival in a neighbouring county, County Donegal, for us. So Brian Friel was the author or the playwright on that one. But those sites, just the amount of associations and links and connections is fantastic. And they get that from me when people arrive, because we're out in a minibus. I never take big groups because of the place I get to. You couldn't get a coach to them. No 30 or 40 seater coaches. So what I do is I'm actually describing the landscape to the people as we travel along as well. It's not just sitting on the bus twiddling your thumbs listening to a CD. I do a running commentary as we go.
No.
It keeps it interesting for me, and I think that people really enjoy it because understanding how ancient our landscape is. And the good thing about it is the further west you get, the landscape's affected less by modern agriculture as well. So you still have these remnant features that are sitting in the landscape.
So when you describe the landscape when you're out there, how do you describe it then?
I describe the landscape that we're actually located in, but what I really enjoy, and I think people pick up on it when they're in the minibus with me, is I can describe the landscape that we drive through. Things like place names, which are 90% in Irish or Gaelic, as I call it, because we share the language with the Scots. They call it Gaelic. But where we have that, place names are all in Gaelic. They can be translated, and it actually shows in the past, even the Bronze Age past or the Celtic past, what these.
So what's a good example of a place name then that describes?
Well, what these were used for in the past. No, one of the ones that I enjoy using is it's for the people that don't want to do a bit of hiking up to about 2,000 feet. We've got a mountain to the south of the city called Mulla Kirbata. And Mulla Kirbata, if you translate it,
that's a bit of mouthful.
Yeah, even some of the locals can't pronounce that one. Mulla Kirbata. Mulla means high ground or mountain. Mulla Kirbata. The Kirbata means place of the pagans.
Mulla Kirbata.
Kirbata. You have to roll your tongue to the back. That's also what I do in the minute. I get the Americans and different people trying to practice a bit of Gaelic, which makes for fun.
I don't know if I will ever be able to speak Gaelic here. It's it's always finding a struggle, even when working with it.
Don't worry about Gaelic.
So Mulla Kirbata,
I can get distracted. Well, this is a hard one. But what's how we go from Mulla Kirbata, the hill. So it means you don't have to climb up this hill, because what I can actually do is point out the hill. It's called Mulla Kirbata, and Mulla Kirbata means the high ground of the pagans. And if you look at the hill, on a clear day, I can point out there's actually a Bronze Age tomb on the top of the hill, and you can actually just see it sitting like a little speck on the top of the hill. And that's what the people, so that would be the place of the pagans. So that's obviously something going back maybe about 1,500 years, where the Christians, where St. Patrick got changed the names, and it was described as the place of the pagans. Before that, it probably in the Bronze Age or early Celtic times had a separate name. So that's a name that goes back maybe 1,100 years. Mulla Kirbata, the hill, the high ground of the pagans.
Oh.
So you have things like that. Other ones then are things like Ardnashee, which means the small hill of the fairies. We have quite a few Ardnashees about the place.
Okay.
That one. So you have that coming in. Tober Kirbata. Tober, which means pagan well. Kirbata, pagan. Tober meaning well. Tober Kirbata. We have places even.
Tober Kirbata?
Yeah. Even where I'm from, Derry, which is Dory, which means the place of the oaks, the oak trees. So it really associates, and that then ties into the Druids. Even the word Druids derived from Dora, the oak tree, because that's the trees that they worship, were the oak trees. So even Derry. So this is a place that's got an ancient history that stretches right back, and it still survives in our place names. And I enjoy doing that as well. But it means that when the people actually see these things as we travel past, they can really make that association and make the link with it as well. When I'm translating the place names from a map, I'm pointing out the features and the landscape. So it keeps the minibus trip interesting. At least I think it keeps it interesting.
Well, that's for sure. So earlier you mentioned bog bodies. What are they?
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, we owe the study of bog bodies really to you Danes, and what's it called? Man, something. Let's say a body that was discovered, I think, quite close to Copenhagen in the early 1950s.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, we have a lot of those actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that where we had been in Ireland. We had been digging the bodies up, but the Irish, being the Irish, usually where they come across a bog body, they may have felt inclined to ignore it rather than bring the authorities in. So it really then became, when that body was found in Denmark, that the museums in Ireland then started paying attention to the bog bodies. So we owe that study of bog bodies to the Danes, and that the work that was done on that initial body that was dug up. But because what's interesting, that is the forensic science and all the rest of it, where they dig a body out of a bog. So the bodies are largely pickled by the mild acids in the bog, and numerous other ecological factors that made the bodies stay preserved for maybe 2,000, 2,500 years. So they've stayed that preserved that they may be squashed flat, but you still recognize them as people.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen a couple of those in Denmark. Where can you see any in Ireland then?
The both bodies in Ireland all go straight off to the museums, but when I take people out onto the habitats, they go to the habitats that are similar, and maybe even habitats that might have bog bodies underneath them. But it's habitats and describe the process, because where the bog bodies were usually where they were put into the bogs, it was a ritual sacrifice by the Bronze Age people and by the early Celts, while the Celts were still pagans before St. Patrick arrived in Ireland. He stopped us doing that type of thing. The tourists will be pleased to hear
that. Yeah, no, definitely pleased to hear that. I'm glad that's not a ritual you can experience anymore in Ireland. Let's put it like that.
Or Denmark, you did it too.
Or Denmark, actually. I can't really steer clear from that. No, or Denmark, or probably any of the other Nordic countries here.
So the bogs and the bog pools that they would have put the body were seen as portals into the other world as well. That's why then they had the ritual sacrifices to the other world. But it was also then for ritual reasons to actually maybe gain some benefit from making the offering. So that's what the speculation is. You can see why they would do it, and even on when you get out on the bog with me, then people can get an appreciation of how it would have happened, and when you really see these bogs, you can understand why the Bronze Age people and the early Celts would have respected these habitats as well. When you walk across them, and I don't walk far across them, they're quite convenient to roads. But again, that's because these habitats don't survive in the wet west of Ireland. A lot of them are largely disappeared on the east coast of Ireland and through most of and across most of Europe as well. Peat's been dug up. Peat bogs have been dug up for fuel or for horticultural purposes.
So what can we do to help preserve the environment when we visit?
Well, particularly in the bogs, it would be a case of stop industry from reclaiming bogs, especially bogs that are seen as pristine and haven't been affected. A lot of the bogs now are that far gone that they'll never be, should we say, restored. So that's where you then have maybe organisations or even local farmers digging the peat for fire. They would dry it out and then use it in their fires. But that's largely sustainable. It's where they bring in big heavy machines and do the work, then that really destroys the bogs, particularly so for the horticultural industry. So what people in general can do is stop buying horticultural peat, because that encourages then
the peat you buy in
for your garden,
in your local garden store. Yeah,
buy a compost bin and start composting. Make your own.
That's a good point.
More sustainability coming in. Buy a compost bin, make your own compost, and use that then in your garden rather than buying peat. I'll be popular with the peat industry.
Yeah, I don't know if we have that many listeners from the peat industry. Let's put it like that. But
I'll put it this way: I wouldn't.
Yeah, probably you wouldn't.
I won't be on their Christmas card list this year.
No, you probably wouldn't. But hey, it's a good tip. We should stop buying that because it'll help preserve the peat bogs.
Well, the other thing on the whole sustainability idea is actually if people travel, and when they travel, then if they go to maybe people that are interested in sustainability and conservation, rather than maybe trying to go to maybe motorheads going to a racing track or a go-kart track, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So if that's really seen by the accommodation providers, hotels, that there is an interest in this type of thing, then they'll start paying more attention to folks like me that want to help conserve things as well. So it's being selective. I suppose it's seen as ethical tourism to an extent as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really rather than destructive. I would call more destructive activities.
So a good tip is then to remember to actively ask in hotels and other places of accommodation what you can do that is more environmentally friendly. That's a very good tip. Speaking of environmentally friendly, then how can people find your tours?
Well, really for me, I'm on foiltrails.com, all one word, foil, FOYLE, trails.com. So also get me then through the Tourism Northern Ireland website. I'm down as a giant experience because of the tombs and things like that with us. I've linked into that one because the tombs with us, the Bronze Age tombs and the Neolithic tombs, are known as giants' graves as well, another name for them. And that ties straight into our
Oh,
giant
nice.
experience that Tourism Northern Ireland are now promoting as well.
Yeah,
Great to see
with
it.
the Giant's Causeway and everything else. Yeah. Thank you very much, Martin. This has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you here today. It's been very informative, and I can't wait to go to, well, Northern Ireland and visit Derry again and see some of these wells specifically. I really want to see some of the wells,
Right.
and I'll have to see if I can figure out how to spot a fairy tree, or if you have to be in the know to see it.
Take a photograph of a fairy tree and tie a rag, or go tie a rag to a rag tree. The fairy tree you really just look at and appreciate. Don't touch them.
Don't take the branches and use them for fire either. I got that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to
You get the curse with
have
them.
all my cows die or have any of the curses. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, thank you very much, Martin. It's been a pleasure.